They were rampaging along, won their first 2 games. They've lost their last 2, but they could have probably won both of them.
A fantastic looking facility there in the deep south.
I'm sure they're going to come out firing tonight.
From memory, he was leading last week. Are you going to be leading this week, or?
From bottom with 6 points and second from bottom with 5. Yes and no. Yes and no. It paid off for them. They got a 2, double the 4 and won 6 points. Depends what the teams above you do, doesn't it?
Unbiased, Miles Davis. Welcome to Unbiased with Miles Davis. It's where we go behind the scenes of bowls, the people, the personalities, the stories behind it. Today is something I'm really looking forward to. This person who's been in my consciousness ever since I came to New Zealand in the mid-'80s. Aramaho's finest, Peter Belliss. Great to chat to you, Peter. I've got to start off by asking exactly where your roots are from. Are you a born and bred Wanganui boy?
Yes, I am. Yes. Always be home, although I did live overseas for 16 years, and obviously I spent a lot of time when I was a professional overseas. More than happy to have retired and come back to Wanganui to live.
What do you consider? I mean, I lived there for a while and I enjoyed it. Although I lived in the poorer part of town, not the nice posh part like you do. But what is it about Wanganui, as we should say nowadays, that you really enjoy?
Look, obviously home was always a great home for me here, and growing up, there was a great group of people that we had around us, and the lifestyle here is pretty laid back. Small town. Everyone knows everyone, and during my younger days when I was playing rugby, that was a pretty good scene for us here. I played for Kairia, which had the pleasure of playing alongside Bill Osborne, so it was wonderful to watch what he did on the field, and so those group of players that you grew up with, obviously some have left town, but there's still a lot here, and it's always great catching up with them. But lifestyle, although to be fair, the last few years there's a lot of people shifted into Wanganui. We now complain about traffic, which is unbelievable.
Don't say there's 2 traffic lights in Wanganui now.
Yes, well, there was an article just this week or last week, the Dublin Street Bridge and people getting held up on that. But yes, they don't know what traffic problems are. I lived in Sydney, so and I've spent a fair amount of time in Auckland, so our problems here are very minor, but they think it's pretty important here if they can't get anywhere within 5 minutes.
Yeah, fair enough. Now Peter, so you're born in Wanganui. Whereabouts did you go to school? Where did you start your sort of academic career?
Right. My parents lived in Aramo, and so I went to Aramo Primary School. Intermediates were just to the fore, and I had 2 years at Wanganui Intermediate before going on to Wanganui Boys College, which is now City College. So that's where my schooling took place. Probably more interested in sport than schooling, to be fair.
Yeah, so I was going to ask you that. What sort of a student were you? Was sort of academia-wise disinterested, or just focused on sport? Or?
Well, certainly focused on sport. Unfortunately, I got meningitis when I was 14.
Oh, no.
And to be up to that point, I think I was a pretty fair student. But after that, concentration levels were not that great. And so from being probably in the top group of students in my class, I was in the bottom group. But very fortunate to get over that and really have nothing too seriously wrong since then. But
that must have been really concerning for your parents, Peter. I mean, it's a serious disease. Can you remember much about it and feel the impacts of it afterwards?
Well, I do, because it was 1966 and the British Lions were playing Wanganui King Country on a Wednesday, and obviously coming from a rugby mad family, going to the game was the most important thing, and I wasn't well enough to go, and I ended up in a coma and woke up 3 days later in hospital. So don't remember too much about that. so fortunate to recover from that, and grateful for the doctors and staff who obviously looked after me really well and during that time.
Yeah, very serious disease. So yeah, well, I think the whole of New Zealand's glad that you made it through. Anyway, now you mentioned your rugby mad family. Now I understand your grandfather was an All Black in the 20s. Actually captained them as well on a tour of Australia. Do you remember much about Grandad?
Yes, I do. He lived in Taihape, and that's where Dad was brought up on the family farm there. He would come along and watch us play rugby. In those days, Whanganui club rugby was Whanganui Rangatiki. Now it includes Taihape, but we used to go up there and play some railway matches, and he used to lean on the fence and watch us play, and unfortunately we were never in his category as far as players were concerned. So yeah, look, I had a little bit of time with my grandfather before he died. He died 1973, I think it was, 73, 74, it was 74. And just before Anzac Day. In those days, Whanganui played Taranaki on Anzac Day, and I was actually selected to play that day against Taranaki, and obviously withdrew because the funeral was actually on Anzac Day afternoon. And it took me a long time before I ever played for Whanganui again after that.
You're not having much luck, are you? You know, like you missed the Lions game, which has been a huge game for the community then because of meningitis, and then your grandfather's funeral stops you playing for a Whanganui. How many did you actually made it? You did play for Whanganui though, didn't you?
Did,
so how many games did you manage to rack up?
I only played 6 matches for Whanganui. I had 2 years of sitting on the bench, and of course in those days you only got a game when someone was injured. So I had a lot of games on the bench, and then had a couple more later on. But like the rugby career was a bit frustrating. Whanganui had a reasonable side. We were never able to match it with the major unions, but we were sort of middle of the road, which means we had some good players, and I suppose the disappointment was that I actually thought I should have had a few more, and I suppose the one time that I really looked forward, we were to have a Shield challenge against Marlborough. Marlborough took the Shield off Canterbury in an upset. And we played. We would have the second Shield challenge, and I actually played against Canterbury, and we got well beaten, 65-16. We got flogged, but they were hurting from losing the Shield, and I had as good a game. One of the guys on the side said, "Well, you were our best forward again today," and then a week later, the team comes out to play Marlborough in a Shield challenge, and I'm not in the side. Told I was going to be playing the Colts match in Wellington that day, and I said, "No, I'm not. You can stick the Colts where the sun doesn't shine."
Yeah, no, fair enough too. And judging by what in the short period of time already, Peter, that I've found out about your rugby career, I'm not surprised. That would have been a bit of a blow to the soul and to the ego.
Yes.
You mentioned your dad as well. Now, your dad played for Whanganui, and he played for Auckland, I understand.
He did, yes.
Did he sneak away, or did you move up there? What was the story with that?
No, well, he went to Flock House, and then he went to Central Hawke's Bay to work on a farm over there. And basically, this was 1937. In those days, they recruited players as well, and he got offered a job at the Otahu Freezing Works and play for Otahu. And so he went up there and played there, and was good enough to play for Auckland during that 1937 season. And then he actually got injured, and he came. I think he had a year out and came back to Whanganui, and spent the rest of his time here. And his first class career went through to 1953. So he had a long career.
That's not a bad effort. That's a hell of a long time to be playing at that level. Now, I've got to ask you this. There's one thing, because your granddad's name was Ernest Arthur, but he was known as Moke. and
Yes.
your father's name was Ernest Verdun, and he was known as Jack. What's your
Yes.
real name? Because it can't be Peter, obviously, because that must be your pseudonym.
Look, I'm sorry to disappoint you. It's just Peter James.
All right, so what now? Verdun in your father's name, is that after the battle in the First World War, or was
Yes,
it?
it is.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. So that's where that comes, and we found out probably when Dad was in his 60s. He required a birth certificate for an insurance policy that he was taken out, and he found he had another name that he never knew of, and that was Wallochra. And that was the ship that took his father after the war, and so that's how. But generally, he was called Moke as well, although he went under Jack. It was Moke, and I suppose my brother and myself also got that. My brother was Big Moke, and I was Mini Moke.
Mini. My family used to have a Mini Moke. It's a little car like a Jeep.
Yes, yes, yes. So those are the names we got when we were growing up and playing rugby.
Yeah, no, fair enough. So now you obviously really into your sports. You're playing rugby to a high level. Now bowls. I understand you got into bowls at a very early age, just sort of in a small way, because the Aramaho Club was built at the back of your parents' place.
That's correct. Yeah. So I was 5 when that was established, and so down the back lawn and into the club, and so I started playing as soon as I could. I played first tournament when I was 8. They were short of a couple of players, and my brother and myself filled in, but I was always over there. In those days, club singles competitions were played in the evenings, and they was always short of markers, so I'd go and mark a number of games, and when they'd finished, they'd leave their bowls out, and I would go out there and play. And so I grew up with the game, so there was always going to be a stage where I'd play it seriously. And that took place after I ended up with a cartilage operation, and that was from cricket, actually. It's amazing how things fall into place. I was undecided whether to play cricket. I'd just left school, and to continue playing cricket or go down to the rowing club, which was only 100 metres away. And my brother was into rowing. He won a New Zealand title. And I was feeling down at fine leg, and decided that I'd go to the rowing club on Monday. And ball got hooked around in my direction, and in attempting to catch it, I actually chopped the cartilage completely in half in my right knee. So that meant an operation probably 6 months later before I had it. And then I had the winter off, and I started playing bowls in the summer. And so that's how it started. So it started earlier than what I anticipated it would have, but obviously no regrets in that.
Yeah, okay. So just a quick one on the thing. I'm assuming you didn't quite make the catch, but I mean, as a young, strapping young man, athletic young man, how on earth did you manage to snap your knee in a attempt to take a catch? I mean, what did you twist funny? Did you land on it?
I have no idea. I know I did drop it, but how it happened, I'm not sure. And one of the problems in those days, that was quite a major operation in comparison to what you get today. So whenever I went to a specialist, it was always okay. And then it got to the stage where just getting up out of a chair or getting out of bed, and the cartilage was completely cut in half, and it would work its way back together, and so it'd be okay for a while. And then just doing something simple, then it would slip out, and they found a piece across in the middle of the knee when they operated. So in those days, you were 10 days in hospital, months recuperating. And, my major concern then was that I wouldn't be able to play rugby again. And fortunately, the operation was successful. And today, my knee's still pretty good. I've always thought that it would give me trouble in later life, but it hasn't, touch wood, at the moment. That led to playing bowls in the summertime, and hence in those days we talk about the young people involved in the game today, but there was a lot of young people playing in the 70s, early 70s when I started. And obviously I was successful right from the start because I had a lot of practice before that. And look, it just grabbed my, I just couldn't spend enough time on the green. I was doing an apprenticeship in the railways when I started, and we'd finish work at 4 o'clock, and on the bike home, which was only a few minutes, and straight onto the green and play 15 minutes off for dinner and back to the green until it was dark. And I just couldn't get enough of it.
What got you into the railways, and what were you doing at the railways?
I was a fitter by trade. My brother had gone there. He was also a fitter, and I was the trade side of things. Look, to be fair, I wasn't the greatest tradesman in the world. Again, sport was the foremost. Obviously, the rugby for a period, but then mid-20s, when my bowling career started to show some signs that I could perhaps be better than just being a good player. That was taking more of my time, and I left the railway 1982. I went to the Commonwealth Games and turned professional the next day.
I understand that you were the first Kiwi to turn professional. Is that right?
There was I was among the first group. The first professional tournaments in New Zealand took place. Epsom, it was called the Epsom 5000, and that was the first professional tournament in New Zealand, and I won that. And then the second one was at Papatoe, and I won that. Although that was prior to the Commonwealth Games, and so I couldn't accept the money if I wanted to go to the Games. And so I turned the first prize money down on both occasions.
How painful was that?
Well, I thought it was okay because Bowls New Zealand sort of hinted that perhaps they would put that money aside for me, and that when I did turn professional, it'll be there. Unfortunately, I'm still waiting.
I wonder if it's probably in some little account somewhere here. I'll get Mark Cameron to have a look for you. It's probably built up a big bit of interest.
Well, it would do, because that was prior to, that might be 1981. So, in those days, it was probably unfair. You look back and wonder how these things happen. We were barred if we accepted money, but there was athletes who were earning hundreds of thousands of dollars competing. So, for us, for a few dollars, it seemed a little unfair. And obviously that did change. And my first money that I earned was on the Sunshine Coast. We went up to Maroochydore the day after the Commonwealth Games and played a one-day event with the great David Bryant, David Corker. Must have been one of there was four of us. Unfortunately, we got rained out, and so we only played for probably 3/4 of an hour.
What, did they just split the prize money up between you, or?
Yeah, look, I remember we got $500 each.
That's not bad in those days. That's good.
No, it was quite good. Yeah.
You'd have to work for a few months at the railways to earn that. Now, it must have been a big decision. I mean, obviously, you love the game from an early age. You're showing great proficiency at the game, and you're confident in your ability. But that must have been a big decision to give up a job and go and start playing bowls.
Look, for me, it was a very easy decision to make because that's what I wanted to do. And, we were hopeful that the professional game would thrive and that we could do well in it. And to be fair, I made a living out of it for a number of years. But after the 80s crash in the stock market, a lot of money went out of the game. We had $50,000 tournaments in New Zealand in the 80s. The bulk of my earnings came from overseas, especially up in the UK. And so it was a lifestyle that was that you dream of, traveling around the world. And while the money was less, all our expenses were picked up. So unlike other sports where it was on the individual pay for everything, for us, our travel and airfares were all included. Our accommodation and meals were all included. So what you won on top of that was, well, you weren't going to get rich. You were able to make a living if you were good enough. And for a period of time, I was able to do that.
Yeah, I think probably when you say a period of time, I think it's probably longer than that. I think you're being a bit humble there. 82, you go to the Commonwealth Games, you medal at the Commonwealth Games in 82, I think in the singles, wasn't it? And then,
it was.
Then
yes.
2 years later, you're playing in the Worlds. I mean, when did you first? Obviously, you're grabbing the attention of the selectors. When did you first represent New Zealand?
1978 was the first time I was selected to play for New Zealand. John Murtagh and myself were selected to go to Newcastle in Australia to play in what was then NBN television series, which included overseas teams as well as locals. And that was prior to the 1978 Commonwealth Games in Edmonton, in Canada. Unfortunately, we didn't have the results which we were looking for there, and hence, while we may have been looked at as being the pair for the Commonwealth Games, we weren't selected. We were unbeaten in the practice 5 days that we had against some pretty good teams, and the Greens were running nicely, New Zealand pace, 16 seconds, and we went to the club which was hosting the event for a function the night before it started, and only to find that the Greens were underwater. They had flooded them, and they were running 12 seconds, and that was something that we hadn't experienced. And so we only won, there was 8 in a section, and we only won 2 out of our 7 matches, and hence a disappointing first start to playing at a higher level.
Was that a deliberate thing by them that they overwatered it to suit their bowlers?
Of course, it's Australia, remember.
Of course, yes. Sorry, it's silly of me to ask the question, Peter. Well, that must have been... Now, I've read somewhere that I'm wondering if that was one of the occasions that led you to do this, that you used to practice by dipping your hands in water and then bowling so that you could get used to playing with a wet bowl.
Yes, well, that occurred after I went up to the UK to play. My first tour up there, I think I was there a month, 31 days. It rained on 29 of them, and hardly played a match when in dry conditions. And I had real problems getting the bowl away. And I just watched their players just pick the bowl up and deliver it. And I thought, well, if they can do it, I can do it. But you need to practice these things. So I came home and would practice with a bucket of water at each end of the green and just put the bowl in my hand in there. So I was able to get it away cleanly and have some idea it was going. So just interesting. I introduced that to the New Zealand team last year or the year before, prior to the last Trans-Tasman we played, because the weather forecast was not good, and so we had this session. And to be fair, the players were good. They did very well in that exercise.
What temperature was the water that you put your hands into? Do you have it nice and tepid, or do you put freezing ones to really toughen them up?
No, we just pour it out of the tap. But these are things that that skills that are need to be practiced. It's no good, finding out that, and you have to hold the bowl differently. And once your hand gets wet and you can't get it dry, then you have a problem. So you've got to learn a different grip and just how it feels coming out of the hand, because rather than coming out of the fingers, like you do on most of the occasions, it comes out of the hand. And so you've got to get used to that and have some idea that the bowl's going to get on the running edge rather than wobble all the way up. And that was part of trying to be always looking to improve, always trying to be a better player.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. Now, you miss out in 78, you get into the 82, you go to the Commonwealth Games. 2 years later at the Worlds. Going into it, what were your expectations? Did you feel confident of victory? Were you hopeful?
Well, I was confident and hopeful. 82 ended up a bit of a disappointment because I probably should have won there, although I was in those days it was a complete round robin, and I played Willie Wood in the last game to determine who wins the gold, and I was well beaten 21-7 in a game in which I played poorly. But it wasn't until after I came home that I realised that in my preparation, I'd been there in 1981 and I lived on the Gold Coast for 3 months preparing. And the games were right at the start of our season, so all the New Zealand players had not been playing. And so in the week leading up to the games, we spent 7 days, 7 hours a day on the green. So nearly 50 hours on the greens leading to the start of the Commonwealth Games. My preparation the year before, in which there was a mini games in which I won the singles in that, and it wasn't until I got home and started comparing my diaries that I found that in 1981 I only spent 15 hours on the green in the week leading into it, compared to nearly 50 during the Commonwealth Games. And so at the start of the Games and the week leading in and the first week of competition, I was in really good touch. And then it started to drop off. And in losing that game, although I'd beaten Rob Perella, I ended up finishing with the bronze. So that was a learning curve that I thought about, that I'm not going to make that mistake again. But also in those stage, I was probably doing what you now call high performance. I was doing a lot of visualization, and part of my training was running around the bridges in Wanganui. And the last quarter was always about visualizing winning the world title against Willie Wood in Scotland. And there was a number of scenarios I used to play over in my mind, and one was that I was just brilliant and won easily, but there was no great satisfaction in that. And I ended up in the position where I was going to have to play the weakest shot that I have to win the world title, with the scores being all square, and that's exactly what happened.
How strange is that? So now, what is, because I've heard, and I remember, as I say, I lived in Wanganui just a year after you won that world, so your name was big around then, and I've had an awareness of you since then. But that shot is known as the perfect bowl, people call it, against Willie Wood. It probably, you couldn't have imagined anything better. What was your weakest shot, and run us through it that particular
look,
day?
my backhand runner was never my go-to shot. My forehand runner was really good, but backhand, it was not quite as good. And although I worked on it, it was the least of the shots that I'd prefer to play. My drive in those days was really good. And I started to learn that you had to play these run shots when you played overseas on the slower greens. The draw drive here in New Zealand was the way that the game was played in those days. But I had to learn to play these run shots. And so the forehand seemed to be far easier for me than the backhand, although today I think it's the reverse when I play. But and what happened, Miles, is, I've played this shot 1,000 times, and the thing about when you play it over in your mind is that I never missed, and it was a real amazing feeling at 20 all, and I to be fair, I'd got out of the game with a fluke a half an hour beforehand, and then Wood got out of it with a fluke a couple of ends before the finish. So we were sort of all square on the lucky shots that kept us in the game. And there wasn't a particularly good end, and I had shot probably 18 inches away, and my third bowl, I sort of tried to block up this backhand side. If I drew another shot, it was a bonus, but I really wanted him to have to switch over to the forehand, and that's what happened. He hasn't played a bowl down the forehand for 3/4 of an hour. And so he plays the forehand. He let it go, and I thought he was narrow, and it just held up and ended up right alongside the jack. With me with one bowl to come, and amazing feeling going back. Like I knew I was going to get it. I knew that it was there, and obviously I got it. The only problem I had was that where my second shot was at that stage was. By getting the shot bowl, I was coming off towards it, and I actually did just catch it, and it was sitting flat, and it just set it up. Fortunate enough, on a measure, it was still shot, but it was an amazing feeling that of knowing that I was going to get it, and that visualization was something that I was really big on in those days, and you hear other sports people, and I suppose I was fortunate enough to do a bit of a tour once with Richard Hadley, a speaking tour, and he told me about his visualization and how he went about dismissing batsmen, and I thought, well, yep, it does work.
I think you're right. I know a lot of golfers do that. They visualise their shot before they've taken it, exactly where they want it to land, how far they want it to roll, and the whole lot. So it brings me to that, and I think you're a big advocate of this, of mental skills, mental strength training, because in the mind, as you've just spoken about and proven, it is one of the key parts of the game. How much practice did you put into that? How much sort of advice did you get on that? And how much would you encourage other bowlers to do that?
Look, I think it's the key to being successful. There is a lot of really good bowlers out there that are all capable of winning any of the major events. And so, there's no real advantage that you can get there because they can deliver the bowl down a certain line down a line with a certain amount of pace, the same as what I can. And I realised that for me to get the edge, then I had to look at the mental side of the game. And so I just experimented. There was not too much around in those days. I think Ken Hodge was involved a little bit with the New Zealand side early on. But I just was by trial and error, and so I developed this for myself. In the early 90s, Mark DeLacy from Wellington said to me he'd written a book, and he was looking for someone to endorse it, and so he sent me up a copy, and it sat on my desk at home in my office for probably a week. And I then said to my then wife, I think I probably should read this. And so one night I hopped into bed and picked up the draft and started reading. And what he was talking about and writing about was what I was doing. And so I rang him the next morning and said, yes, I want to be involved. And so that book originally came out as Think and Play Better Bowls. Then there was some, it got a name change to Perfect Bowls. But that goes through the mental side of and it's just not bowls, it's all sport. The feedback we got from that was quite amazing. And we got letters from golfers saying that that improved their golf from reading this book. We had bowlers who had been playing the game for 20 years who would get in touch with us and say, I've won a club championship for the first time after reading your book. And so that was pretty satisfying. And that you could be part of something that was helping people get more enjoyment out of the game. You know, the winning and losing, you know, as often said, is not that important. But if you win a few, it's a little more enjoyable than getting beaten all the time.
It's only not important if you're losing all the time. Yeah,
no.
Fair enough.
Right.
Now,
That's been pretty successful. And saying that, it's no longer in print. And
oh, that's a pity. I thought you were just giving it a massive plug so you could get some more royalties.
No, unfortunately not. And I'm still getting requests from people, and you know, I go around the second-hand bookshops here in Wanganui actually, and I leave a note for them. You know, if any of these books come in, give us a ring, and I'll take them off your hands. So because people are getting in touch with me and saying, you know, do you have any books? And so I do have a few, but the stock is running down.
Yeah, fair enough. Now, you moved to Australia. You spent a fair amount of time, I think up to about 12 years over in Australia, playing bowls. Then I understand you wanted to play for New South Wales, but you had to declare yourself eligible for Australia. Did that leave a nasty taste in your mouth, or did you seriously consider representing Australia?
My international career had finished then. So I went to Noosa in '96 and had 4 years with the club there, and then spent another two years living in Noosa. But I had been contracted to play for Cabramatta in Sydney, so every weekend I'd fly down to Sydney and play. And then a job became available at Cabramatta as a bowls manager, and I took that position. And so I finished internationally after the 2002 Commonwealth Games. So I ended up playing for. I had actually played for Queensland because at that stage, when I first went to Australia in '96. I was ineligible to play for New Zealand. You had to play for the country of your residence, and obviously I was in Australia. That rule then got changed, which enabled me to be able to continue playing for New Zealand. And when I'd finished in 2002, playing for New South Wales was an option. But you had to be eligible to play for Australia. So I had taken out Australian citizenship, so I have dual citizenship. So that made me eligible to play for Australia. Not that I'd ever play for Australia.
No, that's just, we just wanted to get that clarified there. Now, your international career finished in 2002, you were saying there. Now, I understand that you weren't picked for a side. Now, was that the similar one to where Wanganui wanted you to play for the Colts and you said, stick it up your jacksie? Did you say, right, that's it, if I'm not picked for the side, I've done my bit, I've played for a long time, I'm just calling it quits, or did you split the dummy?
Well, it's probably a bit of both, but to be fair, I realised that my days as the skipper of the New Zealand side had run its course, and there was need for a change. We weren't successful at Manchester. We were beaten in the quarterfinals, so there was a need for a change. I probably thought that I still had a part to play in that, but when they picked a new squad, I wasn't part of it. And then the hard question is, and it was, while the door wasn't shut, you then ask yourself after 20 odd years of international play, are you prepared to do the hard yards to get back in a game? And the answer to that was no. And I suppose, it's one of the problems that any person that has a long period in whatever sport it is, you've still got to have the desire to do the extra hard yards to ensure that whenever you go out there, you're putting in a performance that you can be proud of. And so at that stage, it was my time to say, yes, I've had enough. You always think you could go one more, and I was getting involved in other things. Certainly, my job at Cabramatta as bowls manager was something that I was enjoying, and it also opened up the opportunity to play for New South Wales. Well, that wasn't sort of there. I was still playing pretty good, and New South Wales was a strong side, and so basically when the opportunity came, I first was in the reserve side, and we did a tour of the country area for a week, and I played well enough in some of the events to ensure that I was selected for a couple of years, and that was exciting. I enjoyed playing for New South Wales. To be fair, it was also worth a bit of money to me as well.
Nothing wrong with making a living out of your skills. I think
No,
that's what we should all be doing. Now, Peter, there's a million things that I want to ask you about, but we won't have time, or else people will be thinking, I only wanted a short podcast. This is going on for 5 hours, so we'll catch up another day. But there's a few things that I do want to quickly get your thoughts on, or your responses to. I understand you've recently got married, and that you weren't the one that popped the question.
No, that's correct. Yes. It occurred at the National Fours in Tauranga, and I was that we were having a barbecue. A good friend of mine and bowling mate Lance Tasker and I was staying there. Well, Reen was staying elsewhere with her team, and yes, she asked me to come outside, and I could see that she was a little bit upset, and I was wondering what was going on, and she was just nervous about asking me to marry her, and of course I said yes, and so we've been married only a month.
Oh, right. So it's only a month. Well, congratulations on that one. I thought it might have been a couple of months longer than that.
No.
Now, how long have you been holding her off? I mean, why was she driven to this desperation of having to do the asking? Why didn't you do it?
Good question, and probably I never really thought of it. Having been married once, I thought that was enough. But look, it was put off for 12 months because of COVID. We were scheduled to be married April of last year. And so, it happened on the 16th of April last month. And unfortunately, she's left me already, Miles. Times are tough. Her daughter's just had a baby in Melbourne, and she flew over there a few weeks ago to look after her. So we've just welcomed a granddaughter.
Oh, congratulations!
So
that's what mums are for, though, aren't they? I mean, and daughters, as I'm well aware, need their mums
yes.
there when they have their first baby.
Yes, so very excited about that, and so we'll be away for another couple of weeks. So I'll have her back to myself again.
Yeah, well, at least you've got. We'll talk about your menagerie you've got there in a minute. But I understand also that you've been a busy guy, or busy couple, that you've built a new house. Is that right? And is it by a bowling green?
It is, yes. It's next to the Jury Hill Bowling Club. In fact, they used to have two greens here. Back in the 70s and 80s. And then when membership dropped off, they left it. And so when this section was cleared, there was the banks and the sprinkler heads were still in place. And so our house is built right on what was their second green. So, it's a lovely spot up here. We get some nice views out to Castlecliff, out to the hospital. At the moment, I'm sitting here. I can see about 10 horses only 50 metres away from me in a paddock. Not that I own the horses, but I get the joy of watching the horses there. And we've got a retaining wall where at the moment there's some cows out there as well. So within a kilometre of the CBD of Wanganui, I'm like in the country.
Yeah, it's a beautiful part of the world, and as I mentioned, I used to live in Wanganui, so I know the good spots. I also know the bad spots. As I said, I used to live in Castle Cliff, but we'll move on. We'll move on from that. Just to wrap things up, Peter. At the end we just do what we call a 6 and out, just 6 light sort of personal questions. Firstly, and we know the answer to this because when we first rang you, we heard the purring going on. Have you got a pet?
Yes, we have a dog called Spots. He's a border collie, a blue mill, and he'll be 3 in August. And we also have a cat, a Russian blue, and she's just over a year old. So, they keep me busy. No doubt about that.
She's called Tippy.
Yes.
What's the reason for the name?
Well, when we actually went to Hunterville to get her from a breeder there, and when we brought her home, she sort of went around on tiptoes. So Tippy seemed to be an appropriate.
No, fair enough too. You're a passionate sports supporter as well as a participant. What is your favourite sports team of all teams in the universe?
It'd be the All Blacks.
Above Wanganui?
Of course.
No, that's fair enough. I mean,
the All Blacks will always be number one. And you mentioned my grandfather, and I come out of our bedroom and into a hallway, and there's a photo of the 1922 All Black side that he captained to Australia sitting there. So I say good morning to him every day I get up. Look, the All Blacks. I think my generation. The All Blacks was the ultimate, and while I can't complain about my sporting career, I think we all would have liked to have been an All Black.
Yeah, well, my ex-father-in-law was the first man to play 100 games for Wellington. He was an All Black as well, and I think he probably would have played. He played for Wellington. I probably would have played against your dad, so that would have been an interesting clash between the pair of them. Now, your most admired sports person?
Look, I again can't go past rugby. I think Richie McCaw exhibits all the things that you would like to see, not only as a rugby player, but as a person as well. And so, Richie McCaw.
Yeah, I've got to say that I agree. He's a magnificent example. Both on and off the field. Music. Are you do you like music? If you could go and see any artiste, alive or dead, Peter, who would it be?
Well, I'm don't have any favourites. I like across the board and music, so I don't really have any out and out favourites there. But Rena and I are going to see Rod Stewart. At the Mission next year, all things being equal. So
was that Reen's idea?
Yes, it was.
Fair enough.
I
love Rod too.
Say, Queen was "We Are the Champions." I sort of have an attachment there. And I remember, not only because I was a champion of the world, but I recall when we won a pennant at Noosa Heads Bowls Club, and we had that blast in through the club that night with the vast majority of people dancing on the tables. That was something that I remember for a long time.
Yeah, these bowls people, mate, they can never behave themselves, always get out of order. Film. Is there a favourite movie?
To be fair, no. While we do watch a few movies here, I prefer to watch a sports contest.
Yeah, no, I'm probably with you on that. I can talk about movies from the 30s, 40s, and 50s, all before I was born. But if you asked me what was out today, I wouldn't have a clue.
No.
Now, finally, and we do this with all our people on this podcast. If you were sadly put on death row, what would be your last meal?
What would be my last?
Your last meal.
My last meal. Well, because I'm batching at the moment, I'm probably be able to cook what I like. Not that I'm saying that Reen doesn't cook what I like, but I'm a bit of a steak man. An eye fillet would be mine, and with perhaps some oysters from Bluff on the side.
Yeah, nothing wrong with that. And would you have any accompaniments with the eye fillet?
Well, I'm a beer man, so I'd like a beer with that.
Chips and peas or mashed potato?
Probably mashed potato, but there'd have to be a beer as well.
Yeah, any particular flavour?
Look, if you look in my refrigerator now, you will find some Steinlager Pure. So
that's a good traditional Kiwi one and a great way to end. As I say, Peter Belliss, I could have spoken to you for hours, and hopefully we'll get a chance to have another catch up down the track. Congratulations on grandfatherhood and on your wedding and on your new house. It's been great to talk to you. Thanks for your time.
Miles, it's been my pleasure.
They were rampaging along, won their first 2 games. They've lost their last 2, but they could have probably won both of them.
A fantastic looking facility there in the deep south.
I'm sure they're going to come out firing tonight.
From memory, he was leading last week. Are you going to be leading this week? Or
from bottom with 6 points and second from bottom with 3. Yes and no. Yes and no. It paid off for them. They got a 2, double the 4 and won 6 points. Depends what the teams above you do, doesn't it?
Unbiased, Miles Davis.